Ever get the feeling that the news kind of like reduces entire countries down to like just their conflicts?
Yeah. Oh, really?
It's easy to forget the history and all the culture that's woven into these places,
Yeah.
especially like a place like Afghanistan.
Yeah.
So we're going on this deep dive today to kind of go beyond just the headlines and into a side of Afghanistan that you might not expect.
Yeah.
We're going to journey through centuries, from ancient poets to some pretty unexpected musical revolutionaries.
Oh, wow.
I guarantee you, by the end, you'll never look at Afghanistan the same way again.
Well, I'm really excited to get started.
Me too.
I think it's so remarkable how often Afghanistan's story just gets simplified.
Yeah.
And this deep dive is really about uncovering all those hidden layers.
Yeah.
And I think there's no better place to start than with the Shahnameh,
Oh.
that epic poem that really places Afghanistan at the heart of this world of heroes and legends.
Yeah, the Shahnameh, it's like this window into Afghanistan's soul.
Mm.
It's full of these captivating stories, like the tragic tale of Rostam and Sohrab,
Right.
a father and son who unknowingly clash on the battlefield.
Mm-hmm.
Just brutal stuff.
Yeah, and that tale, while it's fictional, it reveals a core truth, I think, about Afghanistan.
Yeah.
It's a land of contradictions,
Mhm.
You have beauty and violence, cultural fusion, and political upheaval all intertwined.
Right.
It makes you wonder how such a vibrant civilization earned the grim title Graveyard of Empires.
Right. That's the million-dollar question, right?
Right.
How did Afghanistan go from this cultural crossroads to a byword for conflict? That's what we're exploring today.
Absolutely.
We're going to trace this journey through its mystic roots, the rise and fall of reformers, and the unexpected influence of radio.
I love it.
But first, let's begin with a figure I think who's pretty familiar to even those who don't know a lot about Afghanistan.
Okay.
The 13th century poet, Rumi.
Rumi.
I mean, think about it. Rumi, born in Balkh, Afghanistan,
Yeah.
more popular now than ever.
Right. It's wild.
His poetry is all over social media feeds. It's inspired all these best-selling books.
Mm.
Beyonce even named her daughter after him.
Right. Blue Ivy.
Yeah, it's just,
Crazy.
it's incredible, isn't it?
It is.
And Rumi's birthplace, Balkh, was once conquered by Alexander the Great.
Wow.
Talk about a historical melting pot. But to understand Rumi, we have to delve into Sufism.
Okay.
Now, I know many of our listeners may already be familiar with Sufism, but I think what's fascinating here is how it specifically played out in Afghanistan.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
Sufism, as many of you know, is this mystical branch of Islam
Mm-hmm.
that really focuses on a personal spiritual connection with God.
All right.
And in Afghanistan, it acted as this bridge between Islam and the existing influences of like Hinduism and Buddhism,
Oh, wow.
fostering this culture of tolerance and spiritual exploration.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And then the Mongols came.
Right?
I mean, the very empire that was known for its conquests actually uprooted Rumi's family,
Yeah.
forced them to flee Afghanistan.
Uh-huh.
It's a reminder that even great poets aren't immune to the tides of history.
For sure. And it's striking how Rumi, despite experiencing this upheaval, championed love and unity in his poetry.
Yeah.
It challenges us to consider how even destructive forces can inadvertently inspire profound beauty and hope.
Wow.
And his focus on personal spirituality really stands in contrast to later interpretations of Islam, which often emphasized rules and regulations.
Right.
It makes you wonder, how might Afghanistan's trajectory have differed if that spirit of open exploration had persisted?
It's a fascinating thought.
Yeah.
Now let's jump forward a little bit to the 19th century when the world was gripped by this idea of nation building.
Okay.
This era saw Afghanistan caught in the great game, a struggle for influence between the British and Russian empires.
Right. Imagine a chessboard, but instead of wooden pieces, it's the fate of a nation at stake.
Oh, wow.
That was Afghanistan's reality.
Yeah.
The British and Russians were locked in this power struggle, using Afghanistan as their playing field.
Jeez. And right in the middle of this geopolitical tug of war was Mahmud Tarzi.
Right.
Just a brilliant intellectual, spoke numerous languages.
Yeah.
He became a leading voice advocating for Afghanistan's independence from British control.
And Tarzi's vision was so remarkable.
Yeah.
He really envisioned this modern Islamic nation capable of standing on its own 2 feet,
Yeah,
not as a pawn in someone else's game.
exactly.
And his newspaper was instrumental in spreading these ideas, sparking these vital debates, and inspiring a whole generation of Afghans to imagine a different future.
Yeah, then in 1919, this pivotal event shook Afghanistan. the assassination of the king.
Oh, wow.
And his son, Mullah Khan, took the throne.
Okay.
And he was determined to break free from British dominance.
So what's fascinating about this period is how Amanullah Khan, alongside Tarzi and his daughter, Queen Soraya Tarzi, they launched this bold experiment in Muslim modernism.
Right.
They sought to propel Afghanistan into the 20th century while staying true to their Islamic principles.
It's pretty radical. It's those. Some of these reforms...
Oh, for sure.
I mean, abolishing slavery and polygamy.
Right.
Giving women the choice to wear or not wear the burqa. And outlawing bride prices. This was a revolution.
It was huge.
Especially in such a conservative society.
Yeah. And Queen Soraya was a true trailblazer.
Oh, yeah.
In all this.
Yeah.
A passionate advocate for women's rights, she defied traditional norms with her short hair and modern fashion choices.
Right.
She even spearheaded the establishment of the first girls' school in Kabul.
It's inspiring.
It is.
To see how one person can be a catalyst for such significant change.
Absolutely.
But naturally, these rapid reforms sparked resistance.
Of course.
Especially outside the capital, where many held more traditional views.
Right. That's the core tension of social progress, isn't it?
Yeah.
Trying to balance the desire for change with the need to bring everyone along.
Yeah.
And ultimately, these reforms triggered a backlash, leading to Amanullah Khan's overthrow in 1929.
It's a reminder that progress isn't always a straight line.
Yeah.
Sometimes it zigs and zags.
For sure.
But the seeds of change had been sown. And a new tool for spreading ideas was on the horizon. The radio.
Oh, wow.
I mean, think about how impactful radio was back then.
Yeah.
Especially in a country like Afghanistan.
Right. And it's through radio that we encounter Megan Masumi's grandmother.
Oh, yeah.
Who, despite being illiterate, formed a profound connection with Rumi's poetry through these broadcasts.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Radio became this powerful force.
Yeah.
Resurrecting forgotten ideas and giving voice to emotions that might have otherwise remained unspoken.
It's a beautiful testament to the enduring power of art and how it can reach people across social divides.
Absolutely.
And speaking of art, another powerful voice emerged during this period, Ahmed Zahir.
Okay.
His music was this unique blend, fusing Afghan traditions with Western influences.
Like who?
Like Elvis Presley and the Beatles.
Oh, wow.
I mean, it was amazing.
So Zahir's music became the soundtrack of an era defined by experimentation and defiance. You know, Afghanistan was navigating the complexities of the Cold War,
Right.
trying to balance its relationships with both the U.S. and the Soviet Union, accepting aid while grappling with new ideologies like communism and democracy.
Yeah, it was a complex period, and Zahir's music perfectly captured that.
Yeah.
Reflected the changing political landscape, and gave voice to the anxieties and hopes of everyday Afghans.
What's so intriguing is the mystery surrounding his death in a car accident in 1979.
Oh, yeah.
Some believe it wasn't an accident at all, but an assassination.
Really?
Yeah, and his death, I think, reflects this growing unease and unrest that was bubbling beneath the surface of Afghan society.
It's almost symbolic, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like foreshadowing the turmoil that was about to engulf the nation.
Yeah, and then on Christmas Eve, 1979, the world shifted. The Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan,
Wow.
marking the beginning of a conflict that would irrevocably alter the country's fate.
Can you imagine what that must have been like for the Afghan people?
Yeah, it must have been terrifying.
Their lives just suddenly upended by this invasion.
Right, and this is where Megan Masumi's family history becomes incredibly poignant.
Yeah.
They were forced to flee their homeland,
Gee.
embarking on this harrowing escape on camels and rafts.
Wow.
It's just a stark illustration of the chaos and danger that gripped Afghanistan at that time.
It's a stark reminder of the human cost of conflict. All the stories that are often overshadowed by the grand narratives of war and politics.
Right.
And amidst this turmoil, a new force was taking shape. The Taliban.
The Taliban.
But that's a story for the next part of our deep dive.
Okay.
Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss it.
I'm hooked.
Me too.
Yeah.
Welcome back to our deep dive into Afghanistan.
Glad to be back.
Last time we left off with the Soviet invasion, a moment that thrust Afghanistan into this really brutal conflict that lasted for almost a decade.
The Soviet-Afghan War.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was just a clash of ideologies and military might, you know.
Right.
You had the Soviet army, this superpower force, up against these Afghan mujahideen These tribal fighters, fueled by this just fierce determination to protect their land and their way of life.
And then you had the U.S. involvement, too.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Didn't they, like, arm and fund the Mujahideen to counter Soviet influence during the Cold War?
Exactly.
Yeah.
The U.S. saw it as a chance to bog down the Soviets in this costly, unwinnable war, kind of like Vietnam.
Yeah.
A stark example of how these superpower rivalries played out on Afghan soil.
Right.
With just devastating consequences for the Afghan people.
So with Afghanistan caught in this chaotic crossfire,
Yeah.
how did a group like the Taliban even come to power?
Yeah. The Taliban, meaning students in Pashto,
Okay.
they emerged in the early 1990s as the Soviet forces withdrew and the Afghan government crumbled.
Right.
And you have to imagine this vacuum left behind,
Yeah.
a country ravaged by war,
Yeah.
desperate for stability.
Right.
Many Taliban members were young men who had grown up in these refugee camps in Pakistan,
Wow.
steeped in this very strict interpretation of Islamic law.
It's almost like their identity was forged in the fires
Yeah.
of this conflict and displacement.
Yeah, absolutely.
They yearned for order, for a return to what they saw as the true path of Islam.
Yeah, and they were brutally efficient in their rise to power. I mean,
Right.
they swept through Afghanistan city by city,
Yeah.
imposing their harsh interpretation of Sharia law.
And this was a drastic shift, especially after the brief period of liberalization that we talked about earlier.
Absolutely.
Especially for women who just started to taste freedom and opportunity. But the Taliban's appeal wasn't just like based on ideology, right?
No.
There were other forces at play.
For sure.
Like what?
Absolutely. Warlordism was rampant after the Soviet withdrawal.
Oh.
And a lot of Afghans, weary of the constant violence and instability, they saw the Taliban, despite their harshness, as a force for order, a
Right.
way to end the chaos.
It's a heartbreaking irony, isn't it?
It is.
This longing for peace, paving the way for a regime that would ultimately perpetuate suffering.
Yeah, and we can't overlook the role of outside actors either.
Like who?
Pakistan in particular saw the Taliban as a way to extend their influence in Afghanistan
Right.
and counter their rival India.
So once again, Afghanistan becomes entangled in this regional power struggle.
Right.
It just seems like the country is constantly being pulled and pushed by all these external forces.
It is a recurring theme throughout Afghan history.
Yeah.
But while the Taliban were imposing their austere vision,
Right.
there were stirrings of resistance.
Really?
A fight to preserve Afghanistan's rich cultural heritage.
So it's like a cultural underground movement,
Yeah.
battling for beauty and expression
Yeah.
in the face of all this oppression.
Yeah.
What forms did this resistance take?
I mean, music was a vital lifeline.
Really?
Musicians, despite the risks, continued to create and share their music. They found ingenious ways to circumvent the Taliban's ban. Cassette tapes were smuggled across borders, hidden in clothes and baggage.
Wow.
A dangerous act of defiance.
Right.
But it was essential for keeping the spirit of Afghan culture alive.
It's amazing how art finds a way, even in the darkest of times.
Yeah.
This wasn't just about preserving traditional music, though, right? There was something new emerging, too.
Yeah, in the 1990s, a new sound was taking root in Afghanistan.
What?
Hip-hop.
Really?
Afghan youth, inspired by American artists like Tupac and Biggie,
Wow.
began crafting their own rhymes.
Oh, wow.
And their lyrics reflected the realities of life under Taliban rule.
That's incredible. Hip-hop born in the streets of New York.
Yeah.
Finding a voice in war-torn Afghanistan.
That's powerful.
It's a testament to music's ability to transcend borders
Yeah.
and connect people across cultures.
Absolutely.
But this wasn't just like a copy and paste of American hip-hop, was it?
Not at all.
Oh.
This was Afghan hip-hop.
Right.
Infused with their own rhythms and melodies and instruments. Traditional sounds blended with modern beats, this fusion of cultures.
Wow.
A defiant expression of identity in the face of oppression.
So while the Taliban were attempting to erase Afghanistan's cultural diversity, a new generation was using music to reclaim and reinterpret their heritage.
Yeah.
It's an inspiring example of resilience and creative adaptation.
It highlights the dynamic nature of culture, its ability to evolve and adapt.
Right.
I mean, even the most oppressive forces can't completely extinguish the human need for creative expression.
Yeah. It's a glimmer of hope in what was a very dark period.
It was.
But as the 20th century came to a close,
Right.
a new threat was emerging.
Oh.
Terrorism.
Okay.
The events of September 11, 2001 would cast a long shadow over Afghanistan
Yeah.
and drag the country once again onto the global stage.
This new threat would have a profound impact, leading to the U.S.-led invasion in 2001 and the protracted war that followed.
Right.
We'll explore this pivotal chapter in our final part of this deep dive.
Welcome back to our deep dive. So far we've uncovered Afghanistan's journey through centuries of cultural exchange, ambitious reforms, the enduring spirit of its people, even when faced with all this conflict.
Absolutely.
But as we kind of enter the 21st century, the narrative takes this sharp turn with the rise of a global threat.
Yeah.
Terrorism.
9/11 changed the world forever.
Yeah.
The Taliban's harboring of Osama bin Laden and al-Qaeda made them a primary target of the U.S.-led war on terror.
Right.
And it pulled Afghanistan right back into the center of global conflict.
It's hard to believe it's been over 2 decades since the U.S.-led invasion that toppled the Taliban regime.
Right.
And while a lot of Afghans initially welcomed this intervention,
Of course.
hoping for some kind of reprieve from the Taliban's harsh rule, the war, it quickly became mired in complexity.
The U.S. faced some pretty immense challenges in rebuilding a nation that was just fractured by decades of conflict.
Yeah.
Rebuilding infrastructure, establishing a functioning government, fostering stability, it all proved to be just a monumental task.
Yeah.
Especially with the Taliban regrouping and launching a persistent insurgency.
We can't forget about the human cost of this war either.
No, absolutely not.
Thousands of Afghan civilians lost their lives.
Yeah.
Countless others were displaced, and the country's infrastructure was left in ruins.
It was devastating.
The war also exacted this heavy toll on U.S. and allied forces, both in terms of lives lost and the invisible scars of prolonged combat.
Right. It's a reminder that war always carries unintended consequences.
Yeah.
And it often disproportionately affects those who are most vulnerable.
As the years dragged on,
Yeah.
these questions about the war's objectives,
Right.
the feasibility of a military solution, they became increasingly prominent.
Yeah, it felt like Afghanistan was trapped in this perpetual state of transition, never quite reaching a point of lasting peace and stability.
Then in 2021, the world watched in disbelief as the U.S. withdrew and the Taliban swiftly regained control.
I remember that.
Those images of the chaotic evacuation from Kabul,
Oh, yeah.
with people desperately clinging to departing planes, they'll forever be etched in our memories.
I think the fall of Kabul was just this stark reminder of the war's failures.
Right.
And the human cost of a conflict that ultimately failed to achieve its stated objectives.
Yeah, it left this sense of uncertainty hanging over Afghanistan's future.
Right. What now?
Yeah, what now? The Taliban have made all these promises of a more moderate approach this time around. But their history just raises valid concerns about human rights, particularly for women and girls.
Absolutely. And the international community faces this difficult task of balancing these humanitarian needs with concerns about the Taliban's legitimacy and commitment to basic human rights.
It's a delicate situation.
It is.
One that demands careful consideration
Yeah.
and a nuanced understanding of the complexities at play.
For sure.
As we conclude our deep dive, what really strikes me is how much richer and more multifaceted Afghanistan's story is than just these simplified narratives we often encounter in the news.
It's a story of resilience, of cultural vibrancy, of a people who have endured unimaginable hardship yet continue to hold on to hope.
Right. It's a story that deserves our attention,
Absolutely.
our empathy, and our continued engagement.
I think if we truly want to understand Afghanistan's present and shape a more hopeful future, we have to look beyond the headlines, engage with the Afghan people, and learn from their history.
We hope this deep dive has kind of inspired you to delve deeper into this, seek out more information, engage in meaningful conversations about Afghanistan. It's only through understanding that we can begin to build a better future, not just for Afghanistan, but for our world as a whole.
I agree.
Thank you for joining us.
It's been a pleasure.